present. In my brief today, I was asked to talk about the European dimension of dual career in sport, but also asked to pose some questions that may help facilitate the discussion this afternoon. So, as we're short of time, I'm actually going to skip over a few slides. I'll briefly cover them because I think they'll get copies of them at the end anyway. So, who am I? There's a lot there. The two main things are, I'm the National Director for a programme in the UK called the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme, which I'll come on to explain briefly, and I'm chair of the expert group, Human Resources in Sport. So I have a bit of experience. I know a little bit about dual career, both running it in a member state, but also at a European level. So what is TASC? Because you've seen the logo, it's been mentioned a few times. We're a world-leading partnership between education and sport to help talented athletes in England fulfill their potential and balance in their sporting development and their academic and vocational development. Sounds great, people want that. The key area we'll come on to there, it says talented, not elite. It says talented. Hang on. Go. So just some figures here, and I like to put these up at the beginning just to show how long we've been operating. We've been going for over 12 years. We've supported over 6,500 athletes. We've worked with over 1,000 practitioners, helped them develop. We work with over 40 sports and over 100 education institutions. That is way more important than the last line. But I have to put the last line up because that's what makes sports sit up. It is far more important to me that I get somebody through my system that follows a dual career pathway and they develop as a talented athlete and they develop as an individual in their training, their learning, their education. However, to prove it works, during that period, we have athletes that have gone on to win over 100 Olympic or Paralympic medals. So I always get asked when I sit in front of people, how many athletes are you going to have in Rio? I will have no athletes in Rio. I will have a lot of ex-TAS athletes in Rio because we have already supported them and helped them through their education process before they go to the Olympic Games. So that's a bit of background. When asked to talk about the dual career in a European context, I thought there's actually three areas at the moment that you can identify. There's the areas that work that's been done by the Commission, which is guidelines, studies, there's been some council conclusions, a lot of paper. Next is a group of organisations that are working in dual career in the area. There's an organisation which is relatively new called TWIN, which is an organisation of strategic leads for dual career in member states. So that's where a member state has come forward and say, these people are responsible for dual career in this country. How many do you think we've got so far? 7. That's it. Where a member state politically has stepped forward and said, that organisation has responsibility for dual career in the country. Again, we'll come on to that. ES, Laura's hiding somewhere in the audience, which is another organisation that is working in dual career. It's it does a lot best practice exchange. It is very much an educational-based network that does a lot of good work. There is EU Athletes, another athlete organisations, which are doing a lot of work because it's very important to their members. There are also other organisations which touch on dual career that are starting to take interest. All that is taking place self-funded. There is very little support that goes into those networks to help them deliver dual career across Europe. There are also a number of funded projects which have been funded by the European Commission, the European Union, and there's another 9 being agreed at the moment. But they are short-term projects. So as you see, you can probably sit there and, well, there's a couple of issues there, and we'll come on to that later. I'm going to point it this way. So we've sat here an hour and a half, talked about dual career. We've got a statement of what dual career is from Case. But does anybody actually understand what dual career is and what it means? If you sit with a 16-year-old athlete and talk about their dual career, can you explain it to them? We have a very stylized diagram that we use to try to explain the issues surrounding dual career. So I thought it'd be interesting just to show this to you when we talk about elite athletes, talented athletes, what is the issues, the skill gap. So in very simple terms, we call it mind the gap. Those of you that know the English rail system and have traveled on the English rail system, you pull into a station and it's probably a brand new train and it pulls up to an old platform. And the conductor will go, when the doors open, please mind the gap, because it doesn't quite go to the platform. And if you don't do it, you step off the edge and disappear. Now that is the issue with dual career. If you don't get dual career right, the athletes step off the edge and disappear. So, you have an athlete in the bottom. When you sit with them, approximately 13, 14, 15, 16, they have a potential in performance. They have a potential in education. Our job is to make sure they meet both of those. It's not a compromise, it's dual. So, in simple terms, that's dual career. They reach their potential in performance, they reach their potential in education. Seems very simple. Line from here to here. And then they continue in their life. Because a discussion that we have, sit down with, say, ministers or anything, what's more important to you as a nation? An athlete that goes to the Olympics and finishes 8th, I would have loved to have done that, been of the standard to do that. Or somebody that trained at a doctor and for 50 years of their life, they saved thousands of lives. What's more important? And actually, they turn around and say the doctor. Yet, the emphasis they put on the pressure to put people to those Olympics, and they remove the option of becoming a doctor, is where we are at the moment. So on that line, they generally go through a number of different processes: school, education, work. That's great, still can work. I could see that working. But at some point, and then they move on to appropriate vocation. But that's not what happens. They can be going nicely along, then at some point, some nice person comes along to them and says, "You're good. You're very good. We think you can go to the Olympics. You're going to become a sports person." And that happens. They are driven out of education, or education is put on a back burner. And, as you said, the coaches want them to perform, so they get there. So what have we done? In one simple conversation for all these athletes, we've created an education and skills gap. And if there's one thing that the European Union or the Commission go on about, that's what they're there to help and assist with. We are creating athletes who have an education and skills gap. And when we start talking about dual career programs, that's what people now look at. They start looking at that and go, actually, well, we've got a dual career program trying to address that education and skills gap. Now, that is very important, and it is part of a dual career program, but it is actually a very, very small part. Because what you have to do, and consider that if you don't get the education and skills gap, the athlete comes in at a much lower level. They do not meet their potential, their life potential. But what is forgotten is what happens to all those athletes that you go, sorry, you're not quite good enough. You may be very, very talented, but we don't think you're going to make the Olympics. And to be honest, that's the majority that have been discarded. And sport have a very narrow view of this. We're interested in the ones that would win medals. But what you've just done is you've just told 90% of your good athletes We don't really want you. So we look at it slightly differently. You also have a talent gap created. In that one conversation, you create a talent gap. What we try and do in TAS is we try and make the pathway longer to the end of their education. And actually, we've been very lucky. When we started TAS 13 years ago, our athletes were getting that conversation when they were 18, 19. They were being pulled out of the system at that point. But now, because of the improvement in medicine, support system, sports science, the age of the Olympic, just talking Olympic here, teams are getting older. So actually, that conversation is actually taking place later in life. So now the majority of athletes have that conversation when they're 22, 23. So we've got them through their degree, or we've got them through their apprenticeship in motor mechanics, because it's the appropriate qualification. So what we've actually done, we've got rid of the education gap. We've just got a skills gap now. And it's not easy, but it's far simpler to address. So what we've done, rather than when an athlete comes to retire and the advisor sits down and goes, well, what tools have you got? What's your training? Well, I left school at 16. I haven't got any real education. Well, I can get you working in the supermarket. That's the type of, it happens. They can actually have, well, I've got a degree in accountancy. I can do, they've got a tool to work with, and you can address the skills gap. The question about the doctor that Case brought up earlier. But what it also does, and this is how we sell it to sports, you've actually kept a cohort of talented athletes in a system being supported. So we have raised the standard of the whole talent pathway. And if you look at your sporting program, sports, and you actually talk about, well, where do you get your next president? Where do you get your next coach? Where's your next club captain coming from? There's those. That's where they come from. So you've raised the whole standard of performance within your sport, but also you're creating your future well-being within the sport, where in the past you've probably told thousands of athletes you're no good and they walk away from your sport. We've strengthened the level of the sport. So while there is still dual career at the top, we concentrate slightly further down and work on talent. So, what is dual career? This is a very negative slide, sorry. I get asked, and I actually sit, because of the work I do and the connections, with a lot of people who come in and say, oh, we do dual career. And it's nice, you learn something all the time. But the things that are presented as dual career, an athlete studied a degree in sports because that's all that was available. That is presented so many times as dual career. It is not dual career. I had the pleasure of sitting with a national squad who'd just been to the World Championships, and they were rolled out as their dual career athletes for their country. And I went, what course are you doing? Sports coaching, sports coaching, sports coaching, sports coaching, sports coaching. Why? Because that's all they could get us on. That is not dual career. That is not meeting the needs of an athlete for their future life. A student on a scholarship to represent the university sporting program. This answers the question about the states. They've got to be there to be part of the sports talent pathway. If they are taken into a system where come to the university and you play for the university or you play for this, you remove them off the sporting pathway. An employee recruited purely because they're an athlete. One of my friends who I grew up with went on to play rugby for England. Those in the room might question whether that's a standard or elite athlete at the moment, but a very good player, big second row, and he trained as a joiner. Very good joiner. He actually built my kitchen, very good kitchen. But at the end of his retirement, he was approached by a company in the city in London, financial. We'd like you to come and work for us. He's a joiner. They recruited him, and his official title is a ship broker. He spent a year being rolled out to every event as their England international rugby player. That's not dual career. That's not giving an athlete an opportunity. That's using and abusing an athlete. Back to the question about sport buy-in. Sport is very good at going, we do sport. Education, business, that's your problem. You sort it out. We're very good at winning your medals. Passing the buck. An individual institution today attempting to run mini sport programs. I hope there's not that many academics in the room, but academics are very good at, we don't agree with what the sport's doing, we know better, and trying to take ownership. When I talked about the skills gap, there is still a need to support athletes and provide them a dual career. However, there are a number of organisations that spend a lot of money saying we provide dual career opportunities for our athletes. We've got an online learning hub. So if you go to the Olympics and you want to learn about, and you want to do some education and training, we've spent thousands, well, hundreds of thousands developing this system. If they're going to the Olympics and they're learning how to count, no. And you can probably guess which organisation I'm looking at with regards to that. But you have to deal with this early in the athlete's development. So what is dual career? Close to what Case presented. It's a partnership to provide an opportunity for an individual to reach their sporting, academically, work and life potential. So what are the issues? In a European context, in all my work and going around, these are the issues that stand out to me that I think need discussed and addressed. Ownership. I'm not saying it's an education ownership or sport ownership. Who has ownership in the country? I can go to every member state and they'll all go, either the Ministry of Education or the Olympic Committee or the Sports Ministry. And then they follow it with, has the responsibility for. There is a difference between responsibility and ownership. Who has the ownership and the actual skills and the knowledge to drive this forward? If you've got responsibility, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen. Understanding. There is still a complete lack of understanding at a political level of dual career and the issues it brings and the benefits it brings. In simple terms, there's a lack of duty of care. Athletes are being destroyed. Their future is being put on the line for national gain, national prestige. We generally treat the symptoms. We don't treat the cause. So we throw a lot at the top end, we now need to get them jobs, they need a degree. Well, actually, if we'd invested at the beginning, we wouldn't be in this position. Going back, there's a lack of sport engagement and investment. They don't invest, again, we're here to do the sport, everybody else sort it out. Education and business capacity to provide DC. Linked to the other one, you can't suddenly turn around to a university or an education ministry and say, nah, do it. Money's tight. There has to be investment in it. We have some very good systems in Europe. Very good practice, very good projects, some have been mentioned. But it's localized in a part of a country or a region of a country or a country. And I'll actually turn around and say there's probably not one member state in the EU that has a dual career program that does everything. Not good. The mobility, which we've already talked about, of small nations. The mobility opportunities for national programs against talented programs. As we said, will British Cycling allow a French sprinter into their program in Manchester at the Velodrome? No, they won't. Will TAS allow a French cyclist wishing to study in Manchester and continue to developing as a cyclist? Yes, we can. But no one's organising that yet. It's built on personal relationships. We're very a ground level group. This isn't being driven from the top, it's been driven from the bottom up. And there is a divide between professional sports and Olympic sports. And I would actually argue that probably professional sports are further on than a lot of the Olympic sports in understanding this issue. So this is just a number. Going back to my diagram, when we talk about a dual career program and numbers, the numbers that Kay spoke about were to do with the top one. If you go to most countries, we'll talk about our dual career program is about Olympic athletes. It's not about just the Olympic athletes. It's about all those on the full pathway. So just England, not the UK, so just in England, in non-professional sports, I'm talking Olympic here, we currently have approximately 150 athletes at the top. So if you go around the member states, that's where you get about the 100,000 from. But below that, we have 50,000 talented athletes following a sport and education because they're young athletes following a dual career. Yet they are ignored in a lot of cases because they're not seen as the next Olympic medalist. Yet that is the dual career process. We try and fix at the top rather than actually starting at the bottom. So this is actually a model that I use on the task. What do we talk as a dual career partnership? Because it actually shows where Europe may fit in and work. So there are a number of partners in this. Education, and this can be substituted by labour depending on where the athlete is. Sport, the athlete, and the X factor. And each one of those brings something special to the process. I know it's very small, but education brings the academic knowledge, the facilities, the services, the training opportunities. Sport brings the pathway, the commitment to dual career. Local coaching infrastructure. They bring what they're good at. As soon as education start talking about we'll deliver sport and sport start saying we'll do the education, it's not a dual career. It's not a partnership. But what's missing? Ownership, investment, quality control, the experience, the practitioner development. Now that works at a member state level, because that's what we use in TAS, but it also works at a European level. There's still those sectors, so what can Europe bring to the dual career party? It's the same. Case has talked about it, Pascal's talked about it, we're all talking the same thing. So, for this afternoon, just to pose some questions, Bart, to make some notes. I look at dual career in Europe and I see a vibrant, ground level movement. They are trying to drive it forward, and they get little or no support from their member states. So they look to the European Union for support. We need funding for this project. We need funding, and Europe's very good at that. But if there's no support within their member state, there's no structure, that is not a sustainable model for the development of a dual career movement within Europe. What first needs to be done is at a political influencing level, the promotion of dual career to the member states, with them recognizing the need to have ownership and to create a system. So I actually think there needs to be a two-tier approach within Europe, both at a member state level to help the actual promotion and political integration of dual career into both sport and education, and then investment in European-wide processes that will assist those member states. While it might be nice to get Erasmus Plus program for an exchange, what difference does that make in the bigger picture of Europe? It's not sustainable, it will run for 18 months, it will stop, especially if the country doesn't do dual career. So I think there needs to be a slight shift in the investment, and maybe look at the different levels. There is a level within Europe that's doing its best to do best practice and exchanges that gets no support. The networks, the knowledge. There are some real experts in this room. At the moment, Europe are actually doing it in reverse. While we look at dual career and start at the top, Europe are starting right at the bottom, and I would say at the moment it's not sustainable. There are other ways of doing it.
Okay. Would it be possible to start some pilots between countries at the talent level to see whether we can integrate sports and education as example for further development?
Yes, it would be possible, but it would have to be a two-way thing. There are very few. In a tasknet, Jessie, that you put up as an example,
Exactly, yeah.
If there'd been an agreement and Jessie come on the TAS programme, there is a system in place that her coaches at home, her sport at home, even her, if it was a years exchange in the university, where they can get daily information on what Jessie's doing. Yeah. You know, they can track a process. They can even see what she's lifting in the gym. That's them following a pathway. They're not like, oh, they've gone to another country for a year and forgotten about. They are still part of the sporting pathway within their country. So it would have to work where there is a defined. Now, there's probably 2, 3, 4 countries at the moment that you could do that, but there is therefore an opportunity to create something along that lines, even as you said, a pilot.
Yeah, exactly. So
for future learning.
Yeah, exactly.
My view is, but then there would also have to be an investment in, well, we now need to do something with the learning.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.